Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm so delighted about this panel presentation, The Fullness of Personhood Through Ministry to and by Women. We have three amazing women presenting. Just listen to what they've done and they're doing in their lives. It's absolutely amazing. So the first panelist, Dr. Helen Theodoropoulos, is an Orthodox theologian and lecturer, and is adjunct professor at St. Sava Serbian Orthodox School of Theology in Libreville, Illinois, and teaching classes in patristics. And she has also served as an adjunct professor, faculty at the University of St. Mary at Lake the Magdalene Seminary, right here, Loyola University, Chicago, and other schools, and with classes focusing on Orthodox history, theology, and spirituality. Can't get any better. And she leads the Bible study and teaches adult religious education at St. Peter's and Paul Greek Orthodox Church in Glenville, which I visited. It's absolutely amazing. And teaches Bible study at Ascension of Our Lord Greek Orthodox Church in Lincolnshire, Illinois. And our second panelist is Dr. Hermina Nedelescu. She's a Romanian-born scientist, and her research and work is concerned with the neurobiological control of abnormal behavior and brain functions relevant to human psychopathology. And it's so interesting that the talk this morning, we're talking about pleasure and pain, in Dr. Hermina's one of the areas of emphasis, and looking also at drug-paired environments, and has another line of research investigating the neurobiological dysregulation. I know this sounds so interesting and scientific, but it's really about sexual assaulted induced PTSD, so trauma induced and her work is essential, and I think it's so, we're so delighted to have her here. And she also leverages her expertise in neuroscience to develop a theological, anthropological base on the Orthodox Christian tradition. So it's interesting, she's also an instructor at Stepping Higher Inc., and which is a faith-based organization founded by the county in San Diego. And as well, she's actively involved in the state legislation and all the efforts to protect adults from clergy perpetrating sexual abuse. And is a co-founder as the Process on Healing. We heard this word, so many words already this morning. And is a research site for Orthodox Christian victims and survivors of clergy abuse in the Orthodox Church. And she loves in her free time microscopic photography and drawing brain cells, and share the beautiful structure and function of the brain, which, by the way, as a scientist, I'm like, yes, this is so beautiful. And she does this through general, and shares her work with the general public and through art exhibits. And last but not least, Marie Mecera, a dear friend, and she's a co-founder, she's the founder of a nonprofit organization, which you probably know already, St. Phoebe's. They're downstairs, they have a table as well. This is St. Phoebe's Center for the Deaconesses, and was a chair for a decade, and now serves as a board member. And Anne-Marie was involved in the Orthodox Church since early adulthood. She serves for 20 years in her parish as a lay vice chair, and was a member of various OCA task force, Preconciliary Commission, OCA Diocesan Council, the Midwest Diocese, and the OCA Pension Board. And she has a marketing background, and she's using that. She assisted Project Mexico with its public relationship for several years. And the most interesting switch and turn in her career, or addition, or however you want to say it, or alignment, is just completing her chaplaincy training. She did 4 CP units, and she's moving towards certification, so congratulations, this is amazing. And she's in a process of forming a pastoral care ministry at her parish in Orlando, Florida, where she lives with her husband of 45 years. And she's a catechist at her church and parish, and assists with parish communication. So a warm welcome to our dear presenters and panelists. We're so delighted you're here.
Thank you. Would it be all, I'm going to try to put it onto here so that I have my hands free. Excellent, okay. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on us. Welcome, it's wonderful to be here. It's glad to see you all. I'm glad we're more than 3 people in the room. That's encouraging. The theology of our Orthodox faith boldly proclaims both the equality of persons before God and their absolute uniqueness. And both these dimensions of what it means to be a person affect the healing ministry and service to one another that we in the church are to offer. This panel will explore the ways in which the Church's teaching about personhood, directed both to include women amongst its healing ministers and to recognize the particular needs of women when ministering to them. This rich topic will be considered from three quite different but related perspectives. As the first presenter, I will lay the theological groundwork for our discussion. Then Dr. Hermina Nedelescu will use the lens of neuroscientific study to disclose how actions that exclude women are particularly painful and damaging to human personhood and identity, as well as set a foundation for more serious types of abuse. Ms. Marie Mecera, who has recently completed her chaplaincy training, will conclude the presentation from the perspective of direct pastoral care and will call for a woman-to-woman ministry grounded in pastoral and spiritual counseling to meet the unique needs of more than half of the Church's faithful for the building up of the entire church body today. Ministry by women and for women is essential, not as a second best ministry, not as a plan B, because the ministry of men is too busy or neglectful or failing in some way or even at times abusive. Yes, those failures happen, and they're aspects of the need for ministry of women, by women, for women. But women-to-women ministry and the ministry of women is necessary and good even when the ministry of men to women is doing everything it's supposed to do. What grounds our advocacy for the necessity of ministry by women and for women are the core teachings of the Church. What it means to be a person in the image of God, and especially an embodied person. Every human being, every man and woman of every time and place is created in the image and given the vocation to grow in the likeness of God. We stand in this way equal before God, not as identical, but as each imbued with this image, created with the same capacities that the image of God bestows, the capacity for intelligence, for willing freely, for following God or turning away from Him, for imagination and creativity, and for love. St. Basil gives us the words to talk about this equality. He says, "The woman also possesses creation according to the image of God, as indeed does the man. The natures are alike, the virtues are equal, the struggles equal, the judgment alike. Soul is indeed equal in honor to soul. The coverings is different." And that's St. Basil. Furthermore, we are created in the image of God, who is a trinity of three divine persons. As we heard so beautifully today, the discussion of our creation in God's image and who the divine persons are, etc. But persons who are eternally present to each other, co-inhering with each other, eternally giving and offering to one another, a community of communion that is love. This is the God whose image we bear. This image defines us. This is how we are to live and what we are to become. So we see our very identity is grounded in the sharing and communion of person to person. And within our lives, this takes on the characteristic and the character of service and ministry. This means that ministry is to one another, identified by the Lord Himself as diakonia or service, is at the core of who we are created to be. And this is as true for women as it is for men. We might argue that sin, our fallen condition, has changed how we relate to one another and how we exercise this ministry of service. We see that what should be service freely given and lovingly received, we see that distorted into structures of power and oppression. And we see relationships of communion shattered by partiality, segregation, and subordination. Nevertheless, however sin has impaired, limited, or distorted the relationships we have and how we minister to one another, we can say with boldness that within the redeemed life of the church, this cannot be so. We are recalled into being at baptism and chrismation and joined to the church where we are conformed to Christ. We live out our calling to what God intends us to be in the church. This renewed condition, markedly different from that under fallen existence, is also one of transformed relationships within the community of faith. As proclaimed in Galatians, there is neither Greek nor Jew, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. As a unity of all the faithful in Christ, we grow together towards Christ within the church, and each of us also is the church. Collectively, but also personally, we are church. And this vocation belongs equally to us all. We are not talking about something that is a privilege or a right. It is the essential ministry for the whole body of Christ. So ministry sits at the core of what it means to be fully human, and that is thus absolutely crucial that we recognize and support the ministry of women. But this shared nature and vocation is not the whole story of what it means to be human. We heard that a little bit today too. It does not obscure or obliterate our particularities, our unique, unrepeatable personhood. Created in the image of three divine persons, our faith proclaims, and we know ourselves to be persons, unrepeatable, unique, each of us living the shared vocation to be like God, sharing the nature, in our particular way. And there is more. This personhood, this unique, unrepeatable way in which we live is embodied. We humans are body, soul, and spirit. This is blessed by God. God created us so we can call ourselves embodied souls or ensouled bodies. Same thing. Same coin, different sides. And this psychosomatic unity was never meant to be divided, never to take one part and cast it off and liberate the other part. Rather, the whole is to remain unceasingly, intimately, integrally woven together. To disconnect one from the other is to experience disintegration, corruption, the process of death. We unravel, we fall apart, we turn back to nothingness. We know that the incarnation testifies to this unity because through the incarnation, our Lord Jesus Christ has offered salvation, saved the entire person in the fullness of human nature, body, soul, and spirit. This embodied existence belongs to our personhood, enabling us to be a distinct who, unlike any other. As incarnate, embodied persons walking toward God, walking our path, We are each vulnerable to sin and susceptible to falling and in need of healing. This healing must be addressed to our particular embodied self, the full person, body as well as soul and spirit. Because the bodies of women and men differ, the embodied experiences of women and men also differ. And to dismiss or exclude the embodied reality of women, women's voices, women's bodies, women's perspectives, is to tear down, it's to try to separate and disintegrate the fullness of that person. It's to bring death, not to be life-giving. Thus, church ministry and guidance need to address that fullness of the embodied person so that genuine healing of the whole person can occur. Women understand and experience the embodied condition and needs of women in a way not wholly accessible to men. So the church in her own history has recognized this need and for 1,000 years, even more, ordained to the diaconate women whose ministry included, but was not limited to, it had other dimensions and duties, but included the particular concern of woman-to-woman ministry. It's necessary, it flows from our teachings, it's part of our tradition. So we've seen how the fundamental doctrines relate to this ministry. Created to be love, we must all, including women, minister to one another in the in the redeemed life of the church. It's time to turn now to discussing this need from an entirely different perspective, but one in which you see how vital and pressing it becomes in our lives. Thank you.
I was asked to turn this one on. Can you hear me?
On?
Yes.
Yep, okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Helen, for that paper and highlighting the importance of how women's embodied experience are not entirely accessible to men, and therefore there's a limitation there. And so hopefully a diaconate system could compensate for that. So I'm delighted to be here with all of you and to be on this panel and to exchange professional experiences and ideas between the fields of neuroscience, medicine, psychology, and theology. So through this collaborative interaction, we can better respond to the wounded in our midst for the benefit of the church and really for the greater common good. So the topic of clergy-perpetrated sexual abuse in Orthodox churches is not new to OCAMPR. There has been in 1994 a paper it's been mentioned before at a pre-conference actually. And also it has been mentioned by a bishop in the past where he says that sexual abuse is something that the church must come to grips with, mainly because the church is always a place for healing and justice. Since then, there's been some other work, such as this book, Soul Mending, that addresses clergy abuse directly in Chapter 8, the misuse of spiritual authority. Chris Hadis touches upon different points, including the fact that the responsibility in such cases lies with the person in clerical authority because of the power differential. There's immense responsibility there. He also mentions that there are, the denial phenomenon, and this was in 2005. This has been more researched recently, and this is known as Darvel behavior, which stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. So usually the victim gets blamed. That's the work of Jennifer Freed. So how do we address something like this in our church, clergy perpetrated sexual abuse? Well, I like what John Zizula says, that he advocates for a holistic approach to addressing all sorts of healing and illnesses, from mental illnesses to all sorts of other diseases. So he gives the example of a botanist cannot really study a flower without the knowledge of the people who study bees and insects. He says, no one can say, I have no need for you, in the words of St. Paul. He gives the example that a psychiatrist is likely not going to be very effective and will have limitations if they prescribe their patients prostrations in the Jesus prayer, okay? Because a psychologist goes to medical school or a psychiatrist and can provide a little bit more. By the same token, he says that spiritual fathers practicing psychology during confession without a psychological license can be very dangerous. But together, we can address both the trauma that takes place, but also the spiritual aspect. So the outline of my talk, the flow of my talk is as follows. I will define what personhood is from the area of biomedical science, is my area, and focus on this question: how ought we to treat those who are wounded persons in the Orthodox Church? I will show research which has not been shown before on clergy-perpetrated sexual abuse in all Orthodox jurisdictions worldwide. And I will show you that what precedes this is actually spiritual and emotional abuse that sets the stage that allows for clergy sexual abuse. So what is personhood? It is the status of being a person, what makes an entity deserving of rights, responsibilities, and moral consideration. There are attributes that come with personhood, which include consciousness, awareness, rationality, moral agency, and legal recognition. Because personhood asks or can be considered what can be considered a person with moral or legal standing, it's actually discussed in many different fields, such as AI ethics, animal rights, human embryos, advanced dementia, brain organoids, uploaded brains, minds, abortion, animal-human chimeras, vegetative conscious states, artificial uterus, okay? So in my field, we have to adhere to certain ethics. So the field of bioethics, there's this idea that perhaps personhood, because of its evasive definition, it might not be the best word to use. So there's talk about ending this idea of personhood, but really asking the question of how ought we to treat this being and why? Because of the technological advances that we have, because of cases of dementia, what does that mean for that individual person? So this is just an idea there. So I want to focus on this question: how ought we to treat each other in the church, and why? Still addressing personhood. So because we have people with dementia in the church, we have people who have had abortions or will have abortions. This is the reality. We have people who are in vegetative conscious states. We have people with disabilities. We have LGBTQ community in our Orthodox churches. But for the purpose of my talk, we also have children and adults who have been spiritually, emotionally, and even sexually abused by clergy or other youth leaders. So before we can address how we're going to treat each other and such individuals and address this, we have to look at the breadth and depth of the problem. And this hasn't been done before. I apologize that this is not a full slide, but here are the Orthodox churches. The first are the Oriental churches. So these are the churches that did not accept the Council of Chalcedon. I can send you these slides, such as the Coptic Church, okay? So in order to find where these cases of clergy abuse are, we have to look at all the jurisdictions, because the Orthodox Church is not like the Catholic Church with a single governing body in the Vatican. There are many different governing bodies. For example, the autocephalous churches, many of the Orthodox churches in the United States are still under their mother church somewhere else in some other country, okay? This is not the case for the OCA or other ethnic churches. So this is how we divided up when we looked in when we tried to find the data. We looked, for example, the Greek Orthodox Church in America will be under the care of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. So to collect, this is the data method for collection of clergy perpetrated sexual abuse. So we turned first to ChatGPT. As you know, ChatGPT is a transformer. The more you use it, there's learning capabilities, and it led us to a lot of articles in the media. And then from there, we were able to link to more articles. In those articles, we found 196 accused clergy of sexual abuse against children and adults. And we have over 730 victims in our database. We also obtained lists of accused clergy from SNAP, which is an organization for survivors of those abused by priests. We're also starting phase 3, which looks at court records where there are more detailed accounts of these cases. And then we will in the future do phase 4 and phase 5. This is what our database looks like. Each row is a different accused clergy, and we have different columns. So we capture the year of abuse, the year reported, whether it was in the United States or not, we code that. Whether the victim was an adult, male, female, or sometimes it's not reported, child, male, female, total jurisdiction, and the ID of that jurisdiction. So just to show you, for example, this was an example of another article that was sent my way. It was published yesterday, just came out in Australia, a priest who sexually abused not only the mother but the 2 daughters. So these are the kinds of articles that we have, over 1,000 articles in our database. So this is what the data looks like at the moment. 738 victims abused at the hands of 196 clergy. And when I say clergy, these are deacons, bishops, priests, and also nuns. Okay, so it's people, it's a wide, it's not just priests. So you can see that the majority of our data is coming, you see it in the 2017 to 2024. This is not surprising because in the 90s, people didn't really put these articles online. But we can go to the library and find them. We just need to do more search. Just to show you what the proportions of these articles with the accused clergy look like. So outside of the United States, we found most accused clergy in the Russian Orthodox Church. This is not surprising because it's a huge, huge jurisdiction. Okay, and then the Serbian, and then the Orthodox Church in Georgia. Old is the old calendar churches, so we had 56 different divisions. We are so divided as an Orthodox church. In the United States, the majority of the accused clergy were in the Greek Orthodox Church, followed by the OCA, then the Antiochian. I was very surprised that the row core was so small, but we might just need to do a little bit more search with Russian terms, and we might be able to to get more information. The Coptic Church is going to have the first case of a rape. A clergy raped a woman, go to trial in March of 2025. So once this goes public, there may be more Coptic survivors will speak up. So that's in the history of the Coptic Church, the first time. So these are really important 2 graphs that I'm going to show you. When we look at the children abused by clergy, we find that there are more little boys abused than little girls, 58 girls, 247 boys. The picture is completely flipped when we look at adults, and this is very reproducible, not only in our preliminary data, but also across other Christian jurisdictions, where when we look at adults, the majority of the victims are adult women, not children. And this is corroborated with the work of Pamela Cooper-White, who presented at the World Council of Churches in 2013 and said that 90 to 95% of the victims of clergy abuse are actually adult women, not children. It's just that with children, it more easily gets into the news. Another reason for this could be that women are more likely to speak up. All right, so let's look at some theoretical numbers, because what's important to know is that even though our data set has 738 victims, only 2 to 5% of victims actually report. The great majority do not report, they stay silent, and they actually get very sick over time. And so if we want to find out the theoretical number in our database, if we say 738 victims are about 5%, because only 2 to 5% report, and we want to find out the 100% theoretical number, we set up a cross multiplication, we solve for x, we add a correction factor, because let's say some of these people made it up. That's very rare, by the way, but let's say 2 to 4% made it up. We come up with over 14,000 victims theoretically. This is a lot of numbers. This is concerning. And this is also congruent with work from the Catholic Church, a similar data set where they found 16,000 victims. It's also congruent with the work of Anna Salter, a clinical psychologist, who said that before an offender gets caught, he has already offended 150 times. So our number of 14,000 victims in our database is reasonable there. So what does clergy abuse look like? Well, usually you'll have the abusive relationship between the penitent and perpetrator of abuse, and that usually goes to some other clergy. That information gets reported. Then it may get reported to the bishop. Usually that's how it happens in the Catholic setting and Orthodox setting. But the point is that it remains in the religious institution. So for the victim, clergy abuse is complete abandonment. They're kind of on the fringe. It gets reported to other clergy, to the bishops. It doesn't really get reported to law enforcement. And I would argue that the first responders should be trained psychologists or someone who has gone through, chaplaincy program, or just be able to respond to the trauma. So what does it look like in more, at the behavioral level? Well, this is a study by my collaborator, David Pooler. He interviewed 283 women survivors of clergy-perpetrated abuse. All the perpetrators here were male pastors from different Christian traditions. 149 of these women completed the PTSD screen that he created, and 39% of them tested positive for PTSD. Why this is such an alarming number is because in the general population, the prevalence of PTSD is only 12.5%. And to have nearly 40% with clergy-perpetrated abuse is a very high rate of vulnerability to PTSD. It's even higher than war veterans, which is 24.5% in this specific group. Of those 39% who develop PTSD, 40%, almost 40% of them begin to self-medicate to cope. And so now I'm in my field of drug addiction. That's what I do. But that's not all. They have a complete dysregulation of self and identity. They experience insomnia, eating disorders. The suicidal ideation, I was shocked to find out, is nearly 100%, where they, at some point in the process, wanted to end it all. It's just thoughts, okay? So there's increased suicidality rate there. So the trauma is severe. They also reported that less than 10% of them had a positive outcome when they reported to their church authorities. So more than 90% of them were re-traumatized when it was reported to the church authorities. This means that the report is not going to the right person. So it's important for this conference that those who are licensed psychologists can step up to this challenge. So when we turn aside from those who are wounded, such as these victims, then we have turned away from Christ. We're no longer worshiping God. Now I want to talk a little bit about whenever there has been sexual abuse, what we see from these cases that we read is that we see first it's preceded by spiritual and emotional abuse. This is what sets the breeding ground. And little is actually being done about this emotional and spiritual abuse that allows for sexual abuse. And one example of emotional abuse is the rejection of girls and women from desired participation in the liturgical life of the church, as well as decision-making processes. I'm not going to get into clericalism today because that will take too long to explain. But I do want to show you a study in which women were asked to self-report on their health in congregations where they were included to join the governing board, so they were in the decision-making process, as well as in congregations on the right where they were allowed to preach and be involved in religious services. And you can see that they reported a healthier self-score on these surveys more than the women in non-inclusive congregations and non-attendees. Actually, non-inclusive congregations here, some women reported worse health outcome score than not attendees. So it's better to not attend for women's health than to attend a church. This is the study, you can look at it, is what they're claiming, right? These are confidence intervals. So then we ask, well, what does that do to children who are undergoing immense brain development? These are images of neurons from postmortem human. You can see that when a newborn is born, there's not a lot of synaptic connections. Then by the age 6 months and 2 years, there's a lot of synaptogenesis, a lot of connections are built. Then at age 4 is the first period of pruning. And this is the time when a 4-year-old is able to now say that a dime is worth more than a nickel, even though, as you all know, that the nickel is bigger. This is also the time when they can pick out, my son was saying that he's very special because he can go in the altar while the girls cannot. So they can start making these put value on things. It starts at age 4. Then we have another period of pruning around early adolescence, which is 8 years old, by the way. And that's the time when a lot of these young ladies want to join in. So we have to consider, what are we doing to them when we reject them? On the left is a picture where the priest wanted to start the liturgy. This is in Greece. The boys were not there, so he gave candles to the girls to join. And this caused a big upheaval. The priest was removed from ministry just because these girls joined. So imagine the emotional distress that they went under. It made national news, actually, in Greece. On the right side, you have another example of girls and boys participating. And this is actually happening all over the US right now. There are many churches where girls and boys are participating. And some of these churches, actually, that I'm one of them that I'm aware of, the girls were not given the candle on purpose. So they had to process without the candles. And they are told by the boy acolytes that they are not allowed to go into the altar space because they're girls. So making them feel unworthy. So this is emotional abuse because of the rejection. If we look at MRI brains in controlled experimental studies, on the left side, we see the brain region implicated when the participants were excluded from a game. It's the frontal part, the ventral part of the cortex. On the right side, we see the same brain region implicated when the participants were induced pain. Their hand was put in very hot water. So the point here is that whether it's emotional pain from rejection or physical pain, the same pain neural circuits are implicated. So this type of exclusion behavior is actually maltreatment. And maltreatment is abuse. According to the World Health Organization, there are different types of abuse: physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect. I do want to focus just a little bit on this emotional one because I said it sets up the stage for more serious abuse. And here's how it is defined according to the World Health Organization. Emotional and psychological abuse involves both isolated incidents as well as a pattern of failure over time on the part of a parent or caregiver. A caregiver is someone in a helping profession. It could be Sunday school teacher, a therapist, a clergy. Okay, to provide a developmentally appropriate supportive environment. Acts in this category may have a high probability of damaging the child's physical or mental health, his or her physical, mental, spiritual, moral, and social development. Abuse of this type includes the following: restriction of movement. Hopefully that doesn't happen anywhere in the church. Patterns of belittling, blaming, threatening, frightening, discriminating against or ridiculing, and other non-physical forms of rejection. Rejection is there, or hostile environments. So where and who are these perpetrators? There are many potential ones, but also the World Health Organization recognizes that those in position of authority, such as teachers, soldiers, police officers, and clergy, according to the newest update, are potential perpetrators of this kind of abuse. So just to summarize and to provide some learning objectives, spiritual and emotional abuse for example, from rejection, exclusion, or just sexual discrimination, sets the stage and allows for sexual abuse, which is very serious. The targeted victims are who? Well, these are the devout ones, the ones who want to participate, the ones who are hungry for Christ and come to church and want to hold a candle. Because that gives access to the perpetrator. They're always there. And that's very important. Access is very important. This is a public health concern, so it's a direct challenge on me because there's, the impacts are devastating on mental health. There's PTSD involvement, self-medication, and importantly, some do not survive. There have been suicides in the Orthodox Church. So Orthodox Christians and biomedical professions, including you here, especially licensed people and trained people, are really in ideal positions to get together and address this. And clergy need training from you, from us, about how to better treat victims of clergy abuse because it deals with trauma and neurobiological changes. And then this is where I'm wondering, could a system of women deacons be better equipped to minister to people of clergy sexual abuse? And with that, we will continue our research. We have a website. Prosopon means face, which is equivalent to person. We welcome you to connect with us. Thank you very much for your attention. And now it's Anne-Marie.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I'm going to talk about the fullness of personhood through ministry to and by women from a pastoral point of view, following on what Helen and Hermina did such a good job of helping us from their perspectives. Women make up more than half of the faithful in the Orthodox Church. Yet an imbalance exists in our practices towards and with women that not only hurts them, but hurts the entire church community as well. Our practices that deviate from our true theology as based on Christ's teachings have encouraged the mentality that men know what's best for women and provide all the counsel and guidance that women need. In the ancient church, a woman-to-woman ministry existed through the ordained female diaconate. I could focus in length the need to bring back this ancient ordained role, but that is not my focus today, although it is related. Women in the early church ministered to other women in an official manner and one tied to the church through ordination. There was wisdom there, for the church is a hospital, and in time of need, the church should be the first place we seek refuge. Today, I want to focus on that care for women by women. In a patriarchal church, the needs of women can become overlooked. The unique gifts, talents, and experiences of women can be unrecognized and or ignored. A male perspective, however, without its female counterpart, is not only precariously unbalanced, but it can be damaging to a woman's well-being and salvation. As a result, it can be damaging to the entire church. We need to ponder the thought that men and women often express their gifts, talents, and experiences in different ways. The church needs both ways. Our theology is based on the teachings of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, or who I like to refer to as the radical Jesus. As Father Philip Zamaris, who is assistant professor at Holy Cross Orthodox Seminary, stated in a recent presentation, he said, Christ changed everything, he emphasized. Christ came in a society in which women did not speak to males outside of their family. Women held no authority, and they were second-class citizens. Yet, that radical Jesus spoke to the Samaritan woman. In fact, he had a rather deep theological conversation with her, a despised Samaritan woman. He healed the woman with the flow of blood, which abolished the Judaic law of ritual impurity. He listened to his mother when she asked him to perform a miracle before his time, and he listened to her. What's more, Christ's resurrection was revealed to women first, who were instructed to go tell the men. Let's just read between the lines if that's not clear enough. Reverend Dr. Emmanuel Klapsis, retired professor of systematic theology at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology, wrote the following: persons are unique and unrepeatable because their being is formed through and in relationships of love that allow difference to exist without fragmenting the unity of communion that love develops. He goes on to say, it is only in relationships of love that we can embrace the totality of the world and attain the fullness of our humanity. It is that fullness that allows diversity and difference in a uniting world that God loves, sustains, and desires to partake of his glory. Today, we can offer the unique gifts, talents, and experiences of women through women to women ministry. If our church is to be a hospital, it is the church that we should seek out first in times of sorrow, suffering, grief, and when the everyday challenges of life get to be too much. This is in no way an attempt to diminish the gifts of prayer, worship, and Holy Eucharist. We should imagine the possibilities, however, when we equip our parishes with women who have training as chaplains, counselors, medical professionals, and spiritual directors to minister to other women on issues such as motherhood, parenting, caregiving, abortion, miscarriage, abuse, aging, sexuality, marriage, and more. We do a great disservice to the entire Orthodox community by expecting our priests to provide adequate spiritual counseling without giving them professional training and without women to support their work. Here's the troubling potential consequences, as I see it, of the practice of spiritual counseling being limited to our male clergy. Women may not seek out spiritual counseling at all in the first place because of embarrassment, trauma, or fear, just because their priest is male. It's because of his gender. Women may be triggered when relaying an abusive or sexually related story due to the priest being male because of his gender. The priest may provide counseling that misses the mark, is harmful, or even a form of double abuse for a lack of training or perhaps being limited by a male perspective. For the woman, this can result in further trauma, despair, depression, and even the desire to leave the Orthodox Church. Inadequate counseling can harm not only the woman, but her family and her ability to be a healthy and contributing member of her parish community, as well as her family and extensions beyond that. The priest may resort to improper behaviors due to the power placed on him, being overworked and overextended, having ambiguous boundaries, and other issues that can ultimately lead to sexual misconduct. The term for this phenomenon is role identity theory, and I have to thank Hermina for helping me to explore this further, because I believe it is a very powerful thing that we need to think about. In his book, Soul Mending, which I believe Hermina mentioned also, Father John Chrysovis says the following: ministers of the church have the responsibility to act always and only in a manner which is appropriate for the healing and spiritual progress of the person whom they are called to serve. End quote. Father John states that any action contrary to this can not only wound the other person, but, quote, cause them to feel unworthy of the love and forgiveness of God, unquote. This is not the place for further examination of this theory, the role identity theory, but it is one that we should very seriously study and discuss if we are truly to be a hospital for the body and soul of all God's people. What's more, sexual misconduct fuels the need for sexual misconduct advisory committees and hefty budgets for addressing the legal ramifications of allegations. I'm aware of this problem, having served on a diocesan council that needed to deal with sexual misconduct issues and the related budgets. Finally, the church is doing a disservice to its priests as well to expect them to counsel on issues for which they might not be trained, and carrying out a multitude of other duties, performing them all well, and stay healthy mentally and physically. So, let's look for a moment at how many women really need a woman-to-woman ministry. Conservative statistics show that approximately 1 in 4 women were sexually abused in their childhood. Thus, that means there are women in your parish today who are survivors of sexual abuse. To make it even clearer, at least 21 women in a parish with 200 members were sexually abused as children. So that would be, if you have 200 in your parish, 21 of those women were sexually abused as children. Additionally, miscarriages occur in 15 to 25% of recognized pregnancies, 61% of unintended pregnancies, and in abortion worldwide, 66% of an estimated 65 million people are women serving as caregivers to family members, and 1 in 3 women aged 15 and over, which is around 736 million, are subjected to physical and or sexual violence by an intimate partner or sexual violence from a non-partner. If we are shocked, we should be, and we have to realize that those percentages include our Orthodox Christian sisters in Christ. I wish to end my presentation with this proposal, that as we seek to restore proper care of women today, we might look to the insight and wisdom of the ancient church, which valued the gifts women could bring to the church, thus ordaining women to the order of deaconess to meet the needs of women. I propose that we re-examine the examples in word and action that Christ gave us regarding women, and that we formally embrace the talents of women in their unique personhood, women who have training as counselors, chaplains, scientists, spiritual directors, and more for the healing, comfort, and salvation of women and all of God's people. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much. So maybe the panelists, would you like to come here? And let's see questions. There's a mic in the back. So we have about 5 minutes until the break, but the lunch starts at 12:30, so we can stay 10 minutes. So let's hear. Thank you so much. Don't be shy, we have the mic there.
And this always happens. We do such a good job.
Yeah,
That
yes,
there's
it
still
is.
questions.
Yeah, that's
We
right.
have a question. I'll do
Your
the
sister's
mic.
gonna save the day.
As you planned.
I'll bring you.
Okay.
You're going to make yourself look like that.
You can probably hear it fine. There we go. It's not a big group.
Well, thank you very much for all of those presentations, really informative and really passionate and just really great presentations, so thank you very much. I come from the medical profession, and I find it really interesting that we have struggled with this same type of topic in the medical profession with you know, the long history of men being the primary medical provider and not having women introduced into really being medical providers for a long, long period of time. And what we have come to recognize is that patients, for all the exact same reasons that were outlined, need to have the option for providers that look like them, that come from their community, that come from their gender, that because indeed they're, for many, many reasons, not able to really receive or feel comfortable in receiving care from people who are not like them. So within the church, though, it's a little different situation because, of course, we do have priests and hierarchs that are all men in the Orthodox faith. And not only that, but they don't look like all the men that we are familiar with either. They, you know, sometimes our younger people have a very hard time connecting to the clergy that really look more like the hierarchs of old, so to speak. So I guess one of my questions is, how do we address the issue of bringing a community, a current community of faith to the church with people and providers or church providers that kind of look like them? And the concept there is, of course, you know, bringing women in, which represents, you know, more than half of the people that come to church, but also the additional concern of the youth. And, you know, we don't ever talk about the racial disparity, but of course that's something that we truly address a lot in the medical community, but people who are of different race or different culture or different ethnicity, because that too can, you know, and that brings us into a much larger question, but I guess that was really what I was trying to get at. So really, how do you address the issue? And one of the answers is to bring women in, but bringing it to the broader question of how do you help people in faith communities feel connected to their faith providers by helping them look more like them, just to simplify it.
Okay, I'm gonna do a quick little stab, but there's no answer. I actually can't give you an answer because I think the answer is something that we have to work on. We have to collaborate as a church to move toward. But I think what you've identified is actually the theme of this conference. The issue is embodied personhood. And part of the great claim of the Orthodox faith, of course, is that we are the embodied faith. We are the faith that most gloriously proclaims and holds to the fullness of our incarnation, and that we address this in our sacramental life continually, and that is, you know, so central to who we are. But we have to use that very claim to criticize ourselves, to force ourselves to look at how we really structure our relationships and what we've put in place in terms of leadership and governance and decision making, etc. Is the embodied Church of Christ really and truly reflective of the full embodiment of the human condition? And I think we need to hear that voice of criticism because our standards are, you know, very high, and we need to live up to them. Now, that doesn't mean that we would change everything in terms of the way we minister to one another, but that insight can drive us to a more inclusive and more, welcoming kind of ministry where we see how we can bring everybody into the various ways we can minister to one another. Priesthood, of course, or the liturgical ministry is just one ministry, one component, and there are many others. And we still have a lot of resistance in many of our church communities to anything except for the priest doing everything. But hearing our own selves saying an embodied faith needs to do better than that, I think is part of the solution. And we can take what we are learning and go back to our church communities and push for that. So, others?
I have something to add.
So I would say that in Hermina's slides, she showed female servers. And I think it does start in our parishes with that. However, you need to have priests, clergy who are willing, and it also has to be accepted by the bishops, okay? So I think on every level, including in our seminaries, if in the parishes, little boys are seeing little girls being able to do that, again, what will that say to that mentality, to them growing up, so that when they get into seminary, because in seminary, it's happening, okay, where there is this very distinct idea of what a woman is and what she should be. And then they're bringing that in after they are ordained, they're bringing in, and I'm not saying every single one, but I have heard from people who have gone to seminary, men who have gone to seminary and say this is happening. So there's this mentality, and then it's brought into their parish, and then it is perpetuated. It has to also happen with our bishops. Our bishops have to be willing to engage with women in one way or another and hear our side and trust us. They need to bring women to the table and trust what we're saying. And it's very, very difficult with a hierarchical, patriarchal church. But that does not mean that we're going against any kind of canons for bishops, a synod, to sit down with, their male laity as well, to see, because they are isolated somewhat. If they are monks and if they've never been married, just think about that experience. And so I think it has to happen on a lot of different levels. So I will leave it at that.
I'll add something as well. I think we could, to address that question or issue that you brought up, we have to rethink who we are as laity and also as clergy. Clergy is a position of service, not authoritative control to tell little girls not to hold candles. Because it never was like that. I served in the altar as a child in Romania. Never thought anything of it. Until I came here, my brother and I were separated in the church. He could go and I could no longer go. I had to be in the pews. So we have to just rethink, and also our own universal priesthood as lay people as well. Just rethink all of that, what it means to be clergy in service and what it means to be lay people as well.
One more question.
I know we're running out of time. My name's Andrea. I'm a psychologist. I live in North Carolina, and I've worked with our priests to develop kind of like a mental health resource list in the local area. I know there's the mental health directory, which is amazing. I also think when there's trauma, like the face-to-face, in-person therapeutic relationship is so important, and there's such a small town where I live in, there just aren't that many options. I also feel like there's this dual relationship of being a part of a parish. I don't feel comfortable being a therapist for the people at the parish, but I think it would be so nice to have some sort of like sister relationship with another parish nearby where there could be another licensed provider, where the priests are able to make like a very personal recommendation. Wondering if that's already in existence, that maybe I just don't know about, or if that's happening in other areas. Specifically smaller towns when there's not, such a presence of.
The only thing I can say to that, no, actually, because of the jurisdictional system that Orthodoxy operates under here in the U.S., which is not canonical and not healthy for the life of the church, but it has created isolated pockets of Orthodoxy. We don't work together. However, the Assembly of Bishops just this year is beginning an initiative called an Inter-Parish Association. It's just beginning, but the idea is that we can foster local parishes of varying jurisdictions to work together, to begin to pool resources. And that, I think, would be an ideal area if we have trained Orthodox people. And I even envisioned, if we were to ordain a female diaconate, rather than having a trained female deaconess who specializes in sexual abuse and trauma and violence against women, not just assigned to one parish, but to a general region, and be available for multiple parishes. There's so much if we enable our minds to sort of explore and be creative, but I will give the Assembly of Bishops credit. They're beginning to see this as a problem, and that there is a solution by turning to one another instead of rejecting each other and keeping those walls up. There's hope.
Can I just add something to that? I thought, I'm Susan Smalley. I have an MBA. Like, credentials are how we identify ourselves. And that's kind of the point that I want to speak to. That aspect of between parishes. We also know that we also do it to ourselves as women. Just coming out of the trope of when you want to apply for jobs, if we haven't hit 90% of all our qualifications, we're not going to make it. The man does it. Who cares? We can do 50 or 60 as far as he's concerned. He throws his hat in the ring. So we know that we've got that to overcome in a lot of ways. And having said that, there's promotion for us to do to make it aware. And this kind of community would do that. And we need to be more vocal, not to the point of promoting ourselves, but educating. I mean, there have been some times when I've had some opportunities open to me to work on some things while the diocese was thinking about a new position. And I got involved and was working with position description and recruitment and all that. And my background is in economics and public policy as a supervisor with the Corps of Engineers. So, I mean, that's been an adjunct of anybody who's have to manage or whatever. So this thinking outside of what we are, we need to label that, get that, and in the midst of doing that work, the priest turned to me and he said, "How do you know about these things?" And I had another example earlier, many years ago, in our local parish, we were renegotiating a mortgage. And I did some work that just involved just simply the graphics of it and laying it out and educating. As part of the Corps, I had to talk to people about flood control projects at public meetings. Well, and he too said, how do you know about this? So we've got some things too, the answer that, women, I'm associated with St. Phoebe's, women deacons we use for baptism, and we don't need them anymore, so we don't have any need, but we've heard lots of reasons here, plus the other kinds of things. So, I want to just think that not that it's an easy thing, but we've got a lot to work on that. So we shouldn't do that.
Is there any final comments the panel would like to make?
Oh,
That's it.
I just want to say thank you all.
Thank you.
for-